episode 679 of the podcast of the Sweeping America, the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, presented by Betfred Sportsbook. It is Friday, March 10th, 2023. People, I hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody is having a great day. I hope everybody is enjoying a wild championship week so far. By the way, you know it's champ week when I'm wearing the old school UConn shirt here for today's pod. If you're watching on YouTube, you know what I'm talking about. If not, you probably have no idea, but that's neither here nor there. We got a loaded Friday show. Here is what you need to know. I don't even know how we're going to get it all into an hour. Bottom line, this is what's up. We're going to start coaching carousel. The job that we thought would never open has opened. Syracuse, Jim Boeheim is out. Adrian Autry is in. We'll talk about it all. Did Jim Boeheim retire? Was he fired? We're going to discuss it all. Speaking of iconic coaching jobs, Patrick Ewing has been let go at Georgetown. What is next for them? And then, oh, by the way, speaking of the Big East, speaking of coaching openings, little birdie, two of them, as a matter of fact, have gotten in my ear. And I am starting to believe that what we've discussed on this show, Rick Pitino to St. John's, could be a thing. I'll tell you what I know and what the next steps are. From there, we'll take a quick break. We will talk about the Wednesday and Thursday college hoop slates, what happened, who's in, who's out, what's going on, what it all means. Take a quick break. And then how about this? A return guest. So we don't have very many guests on the show, but John Jastremski from The Ringer. He's a New York guy. He hosts the New York podcast on the Ringer Spotify network. And oh, by the way, he is also a Cuse guy. So he's going to come talk Boeheim. He's going to come talk Rick Pitino, St. John's, maybe even a little Aaron Rodgers at the end. JJ, John Jastremski to end the show. Before we get started, a couple quick announcements. The first one, make sure you want to support Aaron Torres Media, go to the Aaron Torres online merchandise page, aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. Get all your March stuff. Go ahead and grab your Marches for Day drinking t-shirt. Your Maura Hurley t-shirt if you're a UConn fan. Your Big Pig Invasion shirt if you're an Arkansas fan. Your Kentucky Revenge Tour shirt if you're a Kentucky fan. We got so much good stuff there. Basketball school shirt for Alabama fans. A lot of good stuff there. Make sure to check it out, aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And then, oh, by the way, we made a major announcement on Wednesday's show that I want to make sure, if you missed it, that you're paying attention to. That announcement is this. It's March. And when you think March, you think one thing, you think brackets. Well, for the third straight March, bracketfanatics.com is here to present our Aaron Torres Pod Bracket Challenge. Third straight year, we worked with them for an NFL Pick'em Challenge this fall. They're back for March Madness. And to enter the Aaron Torres Pod Pick'em Challenge, Bracket Challenge, I should say, this is all you got to do. It's so simple. Go to bracketfanatics.com. Join bracket. The bracket is named Aaron, A-A-R-O-N. Also, you can see a tab with my logo on it. Click that tab. It'll take you to the landing page. You can sign up there or join bracket named Aaron. And I should mention, if you entered last year, you're already in. All you got to do is just confirm that you want to be in. You sign up. And then when the bracket comes out on Sunday, all you got to do is go in there and make your picks. It's that easy. Bracketfanatics.com. Join bracket named Aaron, A-A-R-O-N. And by now, some of you are probably wondering, what do I get if I enter Torres? Well, we have a $1,000 prize pool given out to the top 5 winners. So $1,000 total. 5 of you will win cash. Go to bracketfanatics.com. Join bracket named Aaron, A-A-R-O-N. And oh, by the way, I should mention one more thing about Bracket Fanatics. One of the things that I love about working with them is if you want to run your own bracket. Now, join bracketfanatics.com, bracket named Aaron. But if you want to run your own bracket, you can do it at bracketfanatics.com. You can run your own bracket for free, or, and this is the cool part about Bracket Fanatics, if you have a pay pool, right? A pool where people are paying $5, $10, whatever it is to enter, well, guess what? bracketfanatics.com can collect all of your money on the website and then distribute it to winners. So you don't have to chase people down. You don't have to ask them for money. You don't have to make it weird. You don't have to try to find Doris in accounting who's not giving you her $5 to enter the pool. All you got to do, go to bracketfanatics.com and create your own bracket. But again, bracketfanatics.com. If you want to join mine, bracket named Aaron, click the tab with my logo or just join bracket named Aaron, A-A-R-O-N. And oh, by the way, $1,000 in prizes. With that said, though, You know what we've been waiting for. Let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, for the first time since the mid-1970s, someone other than Jim Boeheim is the head coach of Syracuse basketball. That is right. When we woke up on Wednesday, Jim Boeheim was your Syracuse basketball coach. And when we went to bed Thursday night, Jim Boeheim was not. It was a strange day. It was a weird day. You know, I was watching the game. I'm blessed to be able to watch all these games from home. And even during the game, it kind of felt like there was something a little bit off. Like Jim Boeheim was coaching a little bit more aggressively than I remember him coaching over the last couple years. And so the game ends, Syracuse essentially loses on the buzzer. And I think we start to get an idea why. For those of you who missed it, I can't imagine that anybody listening to this podcast did. But essentially, after the game, Jim Boeheim had one of the strangest press conferences ever. So let's set it up. I'm kind of already going in a lot of different directions. But bottom line, Syracuse loses in the ACC tournament, okay? Jim Boeheim, after the game, goes to the podium. And as I just said, he gives one of the strangest press conferences that I have ever seen. Essentially, he is asked by a reporter, do you plan on retiring? Now, remember, it was just about 2 months ago that Jim Boeheim did an interview with Pete Thamel. He said, it will be my decision. As of right now, I have no plans to retire. Well, he goes to the podium. He's asked about retiring. And first he said, well, I actually sort of gave a retirement speech on Saturday, but none of you were paying attention. To the credit of the reporter that was asking the questions, she then followed up. She said, so are you retiring? He said, that's not what I said. Then she says, does that mean you're leaving Syracuse? And do you want to retire? And Jim Boeheim says, that is not up to me. You're asking the wrong person. So if you saw Jim Boeheim's initial Wednesday press conference, something became very clear and very obvious right away. It appeared as though this was the old-fashioned standoff at the OK Corral, okay? Jim Boeheim was basically, if you watch the press conference, the only takeaway you could have was this. Was that Jim Boeheim at that point probably did not know his future. And basically what he was telling the public was this. I don't know if I am going to be back as head coach at Syracuse next year, but if I'm not back, it is not my choice. I do not have a say in this matter. So that press conference ends. And then about 2 hours later, we get a very strange press release that essentially announces Jim Boeheim's retirement. It's from Syracuse. It basically says we want to thank Coach Boeheim for 47 years as the head coach of the basketball program at this university. Except if you paid close attention to that press release, there were two things that really kind of sort of stood out about it. The first was that nowhere in the press release was the word retired used. Nowhere did it say Jim Boeheim is retiring after 47 years as an incredible ambassador to Syracuse University. The word retire was never used in the statement. Oh, by the way, on top of that, you know what else was missing from that press release? A quote from Jim Boeheim. So imagine if a year ago, Coach K, we find out that he's leaving and we don't get a statement from Coach K. Or Roy Williams is leaving North Carolina and we don't get a statement from Roy Williams. Or Tom Izzo in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. Or John Calipari or whomever. Imagine that. Only that was exactly what we got from Syracuse. And so if you put together the press conference that he had after the Wake Forest loss with the statement, I've just got one thing to say. We can call it a retirement. We can call it a stepping down. We can call it whatever. It's hard not to put the puzzle pieces together and surmise one simple thing. Jim Boeheim did not retire on Wednesday. Jim Boeheim did not step down on Wednesday. Jim Boeheim was essentially being fired without using the word fired on Wednesday. And so it is a stunning end to a stunning career. And it was interesting. I was hosting Fox Sports Radio on Thursday. My partner, Dan Beyer, brought this up. I think you can argue that outside of probably Joe Paterno, who obviously there were legal issues involving Jerry Sandusky, we don't need to get into that. But for a legendary coach, I don't really remember a messier step down, retirement, blah, 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 this and that. You can put a pig, well, what's the old saying? You can put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. Well, you can pretend this is a retirement, a step down, or whatever. Jim Boeheim got fired on Wednesday after 47 years as head coach. So the question now becomes, okay, Torres, so that's what happened. So what do we make of all this news? I've got a couple thoughts on it. The first and most obvious one is, I can't believe Syracuse actually did it. I can't believe that Syracuse did it, because regardless of how the last couple of years went, regardless of the fact that it was probably time, regardless of the fact that it's just probably just time, like I said, I just can't believe that Syracuse had the guts to do it. Jim Boeheim on Wednesday at that press conference, he essentially pushed all of his chips in the middle, was the poker player, and he basically called the school's bluff. He basically said, look, if I'm not here, it's not my choice. You're asking the wrong person. And he basically dared the school to fire him. And so whether it happened, how it happened, I think my number one takeaway is, I just can't believe that Syracuse made the decision to move on from this guy. Now, with that said, what do I always say on this show? Two things can be true. And in this case, I think there's two very obvious things that are true. I think it's very shocking that it happened this way. And I know there's people that have been around Syracuse. Oh, this was the only way that Jim Boeheim would go out. I don't know. But while it was shocking, I'll also add, it does feel like it was time. And it's interesting because I think on this show, I have kind of more aggressively gone after Jim Boeheim than probably just about anybody else in the national media that I know of. This has been a topic constantly on this show for the last 2, 3, 4 years of, just because you were at one point a legend, it doesn't mean you get to coach in perpetuity. You're not a king in England. You're not a Supreme Court justice. This isn't a lifetime appointment. And I've really felt for the last 4 or 5 years, I don't even know if Jim Boeheim really loves doing this anymore. I just think he's 78 years old and he wants something to do. And the numbers back up that this program has been going in the wrong direction for a long time. And this was probably the right move. I've shared this stat before, but I'll share it again. Syracuse joined the ACC in 2014. Okay, 2013, 2014 was their first season in the ACC. First year went pretty good. Since the 2014, 2015 season, okay, 2014, 2015 was 8 years ago. Syracuse has had at least 14 losses in every single one of those seasons since 2014, 2015, except for the COVID year of 2020, 2021, when they only played 28 games. So in full seasons since 2015, they have not finished better than 14 losses. And oh, by the way, they have finished better than 6th in the ACC just once. One time in 9 years, they have finished better than 6th. And so regardless of how great he once was, regardless of how many wins he had, there is no argument that this program was going in the wrong direction and is in the wrong direction. And that I don't think any other coach in America would have been given the latitude and the benefit of the doubt that he has. Now, I understand he made a couple deep tournament runs, all that. It doesn't change the fact that for most of the last decade, Syracuse has essentially been on the bubble. What I think is interesting to me, and what I'm going to talk about with John Jastremski next, is the timing of it all. Because when you think about the timing of this, if you go back to that interview that he did with Pete Thamel back in early to mid-January, something interesting about that statement was this. He said to Pete Thamel, this is my decision. I'll step down when I want to step down, and I feel good, and I plan on keeping to go. That was the same interview, of course, where he accused Wake Forest of buying its whole team and Pitt of buying its whole team. And so I bring it up because to me, I do feel like that was a turning point in everything. One, he thumbed his nose at the administration. He said, I'm making the decision when I'm ready. Two, you dragged a bunch of other schools into this, Wake Forest and Pitt and Miami and whoever else. And so it's one thing if you do stuff like that when you're winning. Nick Saban, in theory, could chirp at his AD if he wants because he's Nick freaking Saban. Kirby Smart, the same, whoever, whatever. I can't think of a basketball coach off the top of my head. But for a losing coach to chirp at his AD, my decision, and then embarrass the university to the point that you have to issue an apology because you just blatantly made something up about Wake Forest, about Pitt, that was a bad look. And that, to me, is when the tide started to turn. Because it's one thing if you're winning and you're saying stuff that embarrasses the program. But it's another when you're not winning, when you're embarrassing and when you're basically publicly calling out your administration. And so it felt like this was kind of the year where everything kind of flipped. I said it at the time when he made that statement. To me, it does feel like most Syracuse fans were willing to give Jim Boeheim the benefit of the doubt because of this. They were willing to give Jim Boeheim the benefit of the doubt because up until this past year, one, I think they had won enough, but two, his sons were on the team up until last season. And so why I bring it up is because it felt like, okay, we're not winning, but every once in a while we make the tournament. And oh, by the way, his kids are on the team. We're not going to force him out when the kids are here. Once the kids graduate, he's not going to want to do this anymore. He's 78. He'll be ready to move on. He'll be ready to spend time with his kids. Well, that didn't happen. Both of his kids left last year. He comes back this year, and he has another abysmal season, 17-15 this year after a 16-17 year. And that's why I think this happened. And so it's interesting timing. It's certainly interesting combatively. I'm sure at some point Jim Boeheim is going to do an interview with somebody. But again, it does feel like it's time. And so looking ahead, all I can say about this is I am so intrigued to see what the Syracuse basketball program becomes post Jim Boeheim. Now, I'm sad to see him go, which we'll get into in a second. But as I've said many times, this, in my opinion, has been maybe the most underachieving basketball program in college basketball over the last decade. I know many of you are young, 20, 25, 23, 19, 17, whatever age you are. But I am here to tell you, it wasn't that long ago that Syracuse was a perennial power. I looked it up, 2012, not that long ago, when Anthony Davis played at Kentucky. Syracuse was top 5 for most of that season. They got a number 1 seed that year. They got a number 1 seed in the 2009 NCAA tournament. And so, or 2010 NCAA tournament, excuse me. So we're talking about 2 number 1 seeds in the last 15 years, last 13 years. But it fell off a cliff quick. And I'm just curious to see what Adrian Autry can do. Now, I'll be blunt. I don't know much about this guy. I know he played there. I know he's been there for a while. But this feels like a program that I believe can take a step up in terms of stature. I've said it many times. I hear people say all the time, well, how can you know what Syracuse is going to be post-Coach Boeheim? We don't know. But I don't think Jim Boeheim has been the one elevating this program. I think he's been dragging it down. And now I want to see what happens next. Because you look at the ACC affiliation. You look at a basketball school first. And you look at the fact, and I've said this many times, Syracuse has one of the most unique recruiting advantages in the country. That Carrier Dome, if you can get kids up to campus for a game day experience in a loaded, packed Carrier Dome, there is nothing like it. Now, you haven't been getting the recruits, I think, because of the coach, the style of play. High school players don't want to play 2-3 zone. They just don't. It's not as effective as it once was. It's hard to recruit as a 78-year-old because everybody is negative recruiting against you. And so now, new head coach, going to be there a while. ACC, if he can get kids to the Dome, I believe this is a program that every year should be in the top 15 to 25 minimum, especially in this era in the ACC where everybody is kind of a mess. Finally, my last thought, let me say this. I've been very critical of Jim Boeheim the last, 3, 4, 5 years. I am still sad to see him go. And because he's gone, I don't want it to be lost that at one point in his life, he was a great college basketball coach, okay? And JJ and I, John Jastremski and I will talk about this in a minute. But we can criticize the last 5, 6, 7 years. But when he had it rolling, that program was elite. You weren't walking into the Carrier Dome and getting a win during his prime. You simply were not. And so because of it, I don't want it to be lost the fact that this guy won 1,000 career regular season games. By the way, he technically won like 1,100, 1,000 of them got vacated. I don't want to take away from the fact that he made 5 Final Fours, that he won a national championship, that he won 10 Big East regular season titles, that the Big East as we know it doesn't exist without Jim Boeheim. I don't want it to be lost that he was a great coach, is a great coach, but it also feels like it was time. So to Jim Boeheim, I know you don't listen to the Aaron Torres Pod. I've been critical of you, but I'm not going to take away from the fact that you were a legend. As I said, 10 Big East regular season titles, 5 Big East tournament titles, 5 Final Fours, a national championship, and the guy is an icon. I hope he enjoys retirement. I hope he does well. I hope he golfs. I hope he spends time with his family. But boy, oh boy, oh boy, what a wild finish to his career. All right, so what I do want to take a quick break. And when I come back, I want to talk a little coaching carousel because I have heard some very interesting things about Rick Pitino and St. John's. We're going to discuss that. Then we'll talk about Georgetown and Patrick Ewing. Patrick Ewing's out. Who's next to Georgetown? Take a quick break. Be right back. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. Good to be back. I do want to get to some other college basketball coaching carousel news. And so we just talked Jim Boeheim, and in a minute, we'll talk about Patrick Ewing and Georgetown. Those two sides parted ways on Thursday, right after the Big East tournament semifinals. UConn beats Providence. But before we get there, I do have kind of an interesting update and an interesting development from a story that I think I have been on more than anybody else. And so for people who are new to this show or are just picking up this show because of some things that I might have said or tweeted over the last couple of days, let me give you a little bit of a background, okay? So about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I was watching St. John's. They were playing a home game against Marquette. Ironically, Marquette was the team they lost to in the Big East tournament on Thursday, but this was back in early January. St. John's did what they very much often have done under Mike Anderson. They built a big lead, then they fell apart, and they ended up losing. And out of nowhere, I don't know what compelled me to tweet this, but I basically tweeted something to the effect of St. John's, Mike Anderson is not the answer. There is a Hall of Fame coach in your city named Rick Pitino. Go get him. He's in New York. He's coaching at Iona. He's still coaching at an elite level. And now that he has been cleared by St. John's, by the NCAA, there is no reason that St. John's shouldn't go get him. So I sent out this tweet, and this happens sometimes when you're just in the media. You say something, you don't realize the ramifications that it's going to have. Well, the second that I sent it out, I got flooded with retweets, comments, posts, DMs, whatever, on Rick Pitino to St. John's. Bunch of St. John's fans, what do you know? Do you think this can happen? Blah, 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 this and that. And so I bring it up because this has kind of been a pseudo topic on this show for about 5, 6, 7 weeks. I have no affiliation to St. John's. I'm a UConn alum, but I am also a college basketball fan that wants as many good programs to be as great as they possibly can. And so I've been on this bandwagon. I've been pushing it, but I'll also be blunt. From everything that I've heard, and I think I have pretty good sources on this. I mean, just because I don't break stories doesn't mean that I don't know. I'm not talking to people all the time. And the sources that I've had on this have basically said, look, Torres, you can yell and scream, and whoever else St. John's fans can yell and scream. Pitino to St. John's, it's not happening. What I've been told by multiple people up until a few days ago was that the powers that be at the school would never sign off on it. And as the powers that be, it's not just the school president, the AD, the board of trustees. There would not be enough of a consensus to bring in Rick Pitino. And so why do I bring it up? It's because I've just kind of given up on the idea. Now, we were selling our We Want Rick t-shirts. Shout out to the St. John's fans that bought them, AaronTorresOnline.com/merchandise. But we were selling them, but I was told it's not going to happen. Well, why do I bring it up? It's because Wednesday, the opening day of the Big East tournament, I had a couple very interesting conversations with some people in college basketball. About middle of the day, I get a text from a great source who has been right on everything that he has ever told me in the college basketball world. He said, Torres, I think you're going to get your wish at St. John's. And I said, what are you talking about? And so we got on the phone and we talked and we this and we that. And he said, I am hearing Rick Pitino is going to go to St. John's. It's going to happen. The powers that be have decided that they are going to make this move. And so I immediately texted somebody else who is very much in the know at St. John's. And that guy told me, I don't know where you got this from, but it ain't going to happen. So I have one source that I really trust that says, okay, this is going to happen. And then I have another source that I trust that says there's 0% chance this is going to happen. I bring it up because probably about 8, 9 o'clock Eastern time on Wednesday, I get a second text from the same source that told me like 6 hours earlier, there's 0% chance this is going to happen. That source now says, Aaron, I don't know who your first source is, but I think this thing might be happening. I think we might be going to get Rick Pitino. And so I bring it up because as of literally 36 hours ago, 72 hours ago, I did not think it was going to happen. But now I think it's going to. And so the question is, what has changed? And I want to just take you a little bit behind the curtain here on what has changed and why I don't think it's done by any stretch, but I think it's more likely than not we may get Rick Pitino to St. John's. The first reason is whether it's publicly, privately, whatever. I think Rick Pitino has made it clear, this is the job that I want. He did an interview a few weeks ago with Matt Norlander from CBS. Matt does a great job. And in that interview, he basically said, like, there's only like 10 states I want to live in. Now I'm paraphrasing, but the insinuation was if Texas Tech opens up, if Ole Miss opens up, if Minnesota opens up, and I don't think Minnesota is going to open up, but that's just a hypothetical. Like, I'm not going to live in Wisconsin or Montana or Idaho or West Texas to coach basketball. I'm just not doing that at that point in my life. And I've said on this show consistently, I've said there's only two places that he wants to be, either New York City or South Florida. Well, South Florida, Miami is not opening. So we can just go ahead and cross that off the list. And I don't know that he's going to go to the University of South Florida, the AAC, which is an irrelevant team. So that came out. And I think that kind of caught the attention of some people at St. John's. You can hear from somebody in the media that Pitino wants to stay in New York, but when he says it himself, that's a completely different deal. Maybe Pitino, he's got ties in the New York area. Is it possible he got in somebody's ear? I think it is possible. I think important people at St. John's that needed to know that this is the job he wants probably now know it. The second part of why I think this could happen, though, to me, is much more interesting. And what I think has happened at St. John's is, I think, to use a bad pun, I understand it's a religious school. I hope nobody gets offended with me saying this. I think they had a come to Jesus moment. I think the administration for weeks and weeks has said, no, this is not an option. And now the reality that you have a Hall of Fame coach in your city that wants your job and is going to leave to take another job, I think it just hit them over the head like a frying pan. Like, this is our chance. Like to me, this whole Rick Pitino situation at St. John's right now, to me, it feels like more than just hiring a basketball coach. To me, this is a university-wide, we either matter or we don't. Do we want to be a player on a national scene? Do we want people to know about this university? Or do we just want to be an also-ran in the Big East like we've been for the last 20 years? Because if we're okay just being okay, then we can go get whatever young up-and-coming head coach or washed-up old guy or whatever. But we've tried everything. We've tried Steve Lavin. We've tried Norm Roberts was the up-and-coming coach. Steve Lavin was the name that everybody knew. Mike Anderson. We tried the alum with Chris Mullen. Just think about those names. Chris Mullen, Steve Lavin, Norm Roberts. If you want to be relevant, those are not the guys that you hire. And so I think the fact that a couple things. One, this guy's in your town. Two, he wants your job. And three, and we're going to talk about this in a second, I think you have a Big East rival in Georgetown that is ready to make a move and is ready to hire Rick Pitino if you don't. And so I think St. John's has had this moment of clarity of like, if we don't get this guy, if we let this guy go because we're on a moral high ground, we are doomed to not only be irrelevant, but we are going to have to face this guy twice a year, every year, and he's going to be blunt. He's probably going to beat our brains in. And so it seems to me that that is the prevailing thought at St. John's, is that they're saying, no, if this guy, if whoever, Louisville was to hire him or Miami was to hire him or Kentucky was to hire him and we never had to face him, we could look ourselves in the mirror and say, nah, that's not the right guy for us. But if he's going to go to our conference rival and beat our brains in, then we got to make a move. And so I'm recording here at about, 7:30, 8:30 Eastern time on Thursday. St. John's has lost in the Big East tournament as the 9 seed or 8 seed or whatever they are to Marquette. My understanding is, and this stuff's always subject to change, I'm not saying it's done, but if things go as planned, I think Mike Anderson is going to be out soon. And I think the wait for Rick Pitino is on. Obviously, as I record, Iona is still in their conference tournament. If they go to the NCAA tournament, that would delay some things. But if I had to bet on it, if I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say it's like 65-35, 70-30 that Rick Pitino is going to be the next head coach at St. John's. And I would have said the opposite. I would have said 15-85 as of a week ago. So keep an eye on that. That's what I know. That's up to date. It's up to the minute. But I think the powers that be at St. John's basically sat there and said, if we don't make this move, we might be irrelevant forever. This is the move that makes us relevant. This is the move that gets us on the back pages in New York. John Jastremski is going to talk about it in a minute, so keep an eye on that. Very quickly, in conjunction with this piece of news, we did get an official, coaching change on Thursday. Patrick Ewing has been let go as the head coach of the Georgetown Hoyas. And this is not the moment in time where I'm going to throw dirt on Patrick Ewing's grave. I thought, I remember I was working at foxsports.com at the time that he was hired. He was the only guy that made sense. Remember, this guy wasn't just an icon at Georgetown as a player. He was a very well-respected coaching assistant in the NBA. And he was a guy that many people thought was going to get an NBA head coaching job. And so Georgetown kind of snagged this guy before an NBA team could. And at the time, I think we all thought it was the right move. But clearly it wasn't going to work out. 6 years, 5 losing seasons. The only season he did not have a losing record was the year of 2021, the COVID year, where they actually won the Big East tournament and made the NCAA tournament. And so if you go back to that season, it's kind of wild to think about. So his only year above 500, or his only year at 500 was 2021. They go 13-13. And that was after winning 4 games in 4 days at the Big East tournament. Remember, that was the year that there was no fans in the stands. They also got the number 1 seed Villanova without Colin Gillespie. He had just gotten hurt like a week before. And so really, it brings an end to the Patrick Ewing era at Georgetown. It's sad. It's disappointing. It's, in some ways, it's kind of like the Boeheim stuff, right? You wanted it to end better. You wanted this to be the move for Georgetown that worked and brought them back, and it just didn't happen. 6 years in, 1 season of finishing at 500, and the last 2 years, you just absolutely cratered out. 6-25 last year, 0-19 in the Big East. This year, 7-25, 2-18 in the Big East, and Patrick Ewing was officially let go on Thursday afternoon. What's interesting now is what's next. And what I will say is that this is one of the more unique coaching carousel situations that we've seen in a long time. And let me explain why. It's because there are great programs that are replacing coaches all the time. St. John's might be doing it in a few weeks. Whoever. UConn did it a few years ago with Dan Hurley. UNLV's done it. North Carolina's done it. Duke's done it, whatever. What's different about Georgetown, though, is that for the first time, basically in the modern era, this is a coaching hire that is going to be made without the presence of John Thompson, the iconic former Georgetown head coach. If you remember, so let me just kind of do a 30,000 thing, right? So John Thompson, of course, greatest coach in school history, one of the great coaches in the history of college basketball. But when he retired in the late 90s, 1999, I believe, he did stick around the program until he passed away just a few years ago. And because of it, because he's such an icon, because he is the most famous person associated with the school alongside Alonzo Mourning and Patrick Ewing and Dikembe Mutombo, he has had a big sway in the decision-making on coaches. Some would say he's been making the decisions, again, up until his passing a few years ago. If you look at the history of Georgetown hires, after John Thompson, here's who's gotten the job. His lead assistant, Craig Esherick, took over for a few years. When he got fired, John Thompson III, JT3, took over. When JT3 ran out of time 6 years ago, Patrick Ewing, the most iconic player in the John Thompson era, took over. And so I just bring it up because every hire since John Thompson retired has had John Thompson's fingerprints all over it. Well, because he passed away, because he's no longer with us, that's what makes this hire so interesting. It's going to be the first time in forever that they can go out of the family and see what's available. The big questions are, what actually is available? Now, as I just said a minute ago, I think at the end of the day, the first candidate, the most obvious candidate, the guy that I think they're going to go after, I do think Georgetown wants Rick Pitino. And the money is there, and the buyout money for John Thompson is there, and it feels like Rick Pitino is the guy that they will go get if Rick Pitino is not the head coach at St. John's. At this point, as I just said, I think St. John's, the tide is starting to turn there. But if St. John's hesitates, if St. John's waits, if St. John's is indecisive, Georgetown, I believe, is ready to step in and name Rick Pitino its next head coach. So I will see. Keep in mind, St. John's, as I record, still has a sitting head coach in Mike Anderson. If he's still there, if Rick Pitino's not coaching after this weekend, if the season ends for Iona before the NCAA tournament, and Rick Pitino is available and Mike Anderson is still the head coach Monday and a Tuesday and a Wednesday and a Thursday of next week, Rick Pitino might not wait around. So that's the first name to keep in mind. The second name, I'll just give you a few names. And I think it's really hard to know who's a candidate and who's not, because ultimately what we're trying to figure out is they haven't made a hire in the modern coaching era without John Thompson. So outside of Rick Pitino, a couple names do stand out. The first one is Mike Brey. Yes, Mike Brey, who just retired at Notre Dame. And I think we talked about it on this show, but I know a few of you have asked me because Mike Brey announced his retirement. I'm leaving Notre Dame. It's time. I've been here 20 plus years. And then about 3 weeks later, he had an interview with Jeff Goodman where he said, oh, no. I'm retiring from Notre Dame, but I plan on keeping coaching. And a lot of you ask me, well, Torres, what does that mean? And does it make sense? And why would that happen? And how did he quit, but he's still coaching? And as I said at the time, to me, that pointed to one of two things. Either it was him letting Georgetown know that he wanted that job, or Georgetown telling him, hey, we're interested in you, but you got to let the world, we can't hire you out of retirement. You got to let the world know that you want to coach. And so for the background, a lot of people probably sitting there saying, why Mike Brey? He's been at Notre Dame forever. Bottom line is, this guy is from the Maryland, D.C. area. He coached at DeMatha High School, one of the great iconic high school programs in America. He's a D.C. guy through and through. And so for years, there's always been speculation that he wants to get back to the D.C. area. His first head coaching job was at Delaware. He's been at Notre Dame since the early 2000s. And so my hunch is that he unretired from Notre Dame to let the world know that I want to coach and this is the job that I want. I don't think Mike Brey is coming back to, again, coach at wherever, fill in the blank, Georgia Southern, which just opened today, or Cal, which just opened on Thursday. I think he wants this job. This is probably the only job he would take, but it'll be interesting to see if Georgetown would actually make a move. Obviously, Mike Brey is in his mid-60s right now, about 62, 63, so early 60s. But if you hire him, it's not a 10-year thing. It's not a 20-year thing. It's probably a 5-6 year thing to get back on track. The other name I will say that keeps popping up, and I would say I don't want to say that I don't understand it, but it keeps popping up too much to the point that it feels like there has to be something there. That's Providence head coach Ed Cooley. And Ed Cooley, I don't think people realize, has done an incredible job at Providence. Providence is one of those schools, I think they have this incredible history. Ed Cooley is basically the best coach that they've ever had, at least in the modern era of college basketball, okay? So they won the Big East last year. And basically from 2014 on, they made the tournament in 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 5 straight years. That was the first time in school history that they made the NCAA tournament for 5 straight years. And as a matter of fact, you go back to 1990, before Ed Cooley, the 24 years before that, they made 5 total NCAA tournaments. He makes 5 NCAA tournaments from 2014 on, plus 2022, plus this year they're going to make the tournament as well. Question is, why would Ed Cooley leave? Well, one, Georgetown's a better job. Providence fans, don't get mad. It's nothing personal. It's just the truth. Bottom line, Georgetown, it's a better job. 2, I do think it's kind of interesting the situation at Georgetown. So if you go back to this past weekend, Providence on senior day, I thought this was really interesting. Did you see what happened? Did you see what happened at Providence on senior day? They booed the Providence Friars at home. Ed Cooley's son was tweeting about it. It was a weird deal. And I don't want to say like the fan base has turned on him. I don't think it's that at all. But Ed Cooley just finished he's in the middle of his 11th year at Providence. I know he's from Providence. He's from the Rhode Island area. But it does feel like maybe it's time for him to move on. I don't know if that's actually what he wants, but there's enough speculation that it makes me think that he would seriously consider it. Now, keep in mind, he was a candidate at Maryland last year and got a big extension. And that, to me, is the question we have to ask ourselves with Ed Cooley, is really 2 things. 1, would he want the job? But then 2, on top of that, what's his buyout? Because remember, Providence is a private school. It's hard to know exactly what it would take to get him out of his contract. But if they can get him out of his contract, I think it's a job that he would absolutely consider. And again, there's just too much smoke to the idea of Ed Cooley. It's at least a possibility in my mind. Again, I think a lot of it depends on the job situation. By the way, imagine that. Ed Cooley to Providence, maybe Rick Pitino to St. John's. What happens at Providence at that point? We could see a lot of turnover in the Big East. The final obvious name to me is a guy that a lot of you might not know. His name's Micah Shrewsbury. Okay, Micah Shrewsbury is currently the head coach at Penn State. Penn State is in the middle of a season in which they're right on the bubble of the NCAA tournament. I don't know if they'll make it or not. But in year two, at probably the toughest job in the Big Ten, not named Northwestern, he's killing it. He's doing really well. They play a fun style. And it's clear this guy knows how to build a program in the portal era. 2 years in, they're competing for NCAA tournament berths. They're really well coached if you watch him. And he's got a little bit of a track record too. Coached under Brad Stevens with the Boston Celtics. Coached under Matt Painter at Purdue under 2 separate instances before he got this Penn State job. So this guy has the credibility, the background, the kind of, if you will, street cred among basketball people. But now he's been a head coach and he's doing it. And so he's the one where if you just don't want Mike Bray because he's too old, and Ed Cooley says no, and Rick Pitino, whatever, he's the one that I don't think says no if he's offered it, but he's the name to keep in mind. Tell you, the Pitino stuff is interesting. The Ed Cooley stuff is interesting. Keep an eye. We will continue to discuss this as time goes on. But those are the 4 names that come to mind for me for Georgetown. I do want to switch gears, and I actually want to get to some of the on-the-court results. We just spent a lot of time talking about some of the coaching carousel stuff, and so because of it, it just feels like let's just try to get to some of the games, the matchups, what it all means, all that good stuff. We'll get to John Jastremski on the back end. This is a very busy show, so we will try to keep this segment a little bit quicker, kind of a whip around style. Let's get to the Power 6 conferences, what happened, what you need to know. Let's start in the ACC, because the ACC to me, as I said, I thought it was a very interesting conference coming in. It felt like Miami, Duke, and really outside of those two, only the number 2 seed in this tournament, Virginia. So Virginia, Miami, and Duke felt like the only teams that were really in. And everybody else was playing for something. So obviously the big news in Greensboro outside of Jim Boeheim was the bubble. The biggest story was, of course, North Carolina, the reigning national runners-up. I felt like North Carolina came in needing to win a minimum of 2. Basically, they had to beat Boston College on the opening night. Then they had to beat Virginia in the quarterfinals just to play themselves onto the bubble. Probably needed to win a semifinal, play in the final to get in as an at-large if they didn't win the automatic bid. Well, just one problem. They lost to Virginia in the quarterfinals on Thursday night. North Carolina's regular season and conference tournament is done. And I don't think they're making the NCAA tournament. Listen, I could go on and on with the North Carolina thing, but bottom line is I think there was this sentiment of like, don't let North Carolina get hot in Greensboro. And I mean, I guess I sort of get it. They clearly have the talent. They're playing in their home state. It's a de facto home court, but they are kind of who they are. They really haven't been good since the opening night of the season. It never really got better. They never really put anything together for more than a 2, 3, 4 game stretch. And so I'm not surprised that they lost to Virginia. And now you look at them and it feels like they're going to get an NIT bid, and I don't know whether they're going to accept it or not. The bottom line with North Carolina, again, inconsistent all year, needed 2, probably 3 wins. They get 1. And you look at the resume, and there's really nothing that reflects that they have an NCAA tournament resume right now. Overall, on the season, no really, really, really bad losses. But they have, and I cannot believe I'm saying this, they have 1 quad 1 win all season long. 1 quad 1 win. It was a few weeks ago against Virginia at home. And other than that, the resume is just nothing to speak of. They kind of took care of the bottom half of the ACC. The top half they struggle with. They got swept by Pitt. They lost at NC State. They lost at Miami. They got swept by Duke. You go on and on. There just isn't that much there. And so, I mean, I guess in theory, if all sorts of crazy stuff happened at this point, maybe they get into the play-in. But I don't even think they get into the play-in at this point because most of the teams that needed to win kind of won the games that they needed to. North Carolina, in my opinion, is out of the NCAA tournament picture. We will follow on Sunday. I don't really see anything resembling a resume that reflects an NCAA tournament team. They lose on Thursday night to Virginia. I think North Carolina is out. Let's stay in the ACC. Pitt and NC State. Let's just kind of do them together. They were kind of an interesting pair because I think neither of those teams really, what those two teams needed, they needed to avoid bad losses more than they needed great wins. Well, the good news, Pitt took care of business in their opener against Georgia Tech and Josh Pastner. NC State obliterated Virginia Tech in their opener. Both teams avoided bad losses. Now, the question is, neither of them won in their quarterfinal. Pitt got blasted by Duke. NC State got blasted by Clemson. And now the question becomes, did they do enough? They avoided the bad losses. They didn't add any impressive wins to the resume, but was that enough? For NC State, I don't want to jinx it because a few years ago, NC State was the first team out of the tournament, and I think it was 2019. So it's happened to NC State fans recently. I think they're in, though. I think they're good. And they will be a problem if they get in. Those three guards, Jarkel Joyner, Terquavian Smith, and Casey Morsell are a problem. Jack Clark coming on strong. NC State probably did enough. Pitt, in my opinion, probably did enough as well. Again, avoided that bad loss. But you look at their numbers, they're not great. They have one or two really bad losses early in the season. This is the Pitt Panthers that I'm talking about. If you go back to November, I don't know about really bad losses, but they lost to Vanderbilt when they weren't playing well. They lost to VCU, who's kind of only okay. They lost to Michigan, who we're going to get into in a second. But Pitt, probably you look at their resume. Overall, they're sitting at, after this tournament, 22-11. Again, no terrible losses, but no really, really, really great wins. They did sweep North Carolina. They did have in the out-of-conference a win over Northwestern. They did take care of NC State early in the conference play. It feels as though Pitt is in. Wouldn't shock me if they end up getting a play-in spot. So in other words, one of those first four games in Dayton. Think Pitt is in. Think they're okay. Think NC State should be good as well. The only other quarterfinal that I did not mention, number one, Miami took care of business against Wake Forest. They were up. Wake Forest rallied. Wake Forest, of course, is the team that beat North Carolina. Wake Forest is out. Miami is in. Sets up semifinals on Friday night. Miami against Duke. They might be the two best teams in this tournament right now. And Clemson against Virginia. My hunch is Virginia wins. Miami and Duke. Miami destroyed Duke in Miami earlier this year. Duke got revenge at Cameron Indoor, so it'll be an interesting one. I picked Miami to win the tournament. Let's stick with that. Let's keep it going. Let's go to some of the other conferences. The Big Ten, they, like the SEC, they have not even gotten to the quarterfinals yet. So their best teams, Purdue, Indiana, Northwestern, and Michigan State, have yet to start the Big Ten tournament. But the Big Ten, as I talked about coming into the week, they had by far the biggest bubble, the most teams on the bubble. Some of them had a really good performance. Some of them had a really bad performance. Let's start with the really bad. Wisconsin actually had to play a play-in game on the opening night of the tournament. They lose to Ohio State. Wisconsin, in my opinion, at 17-14, 9-11 in the Big Ten. They are out. Wisconsin, incredible stat. Never won. How about this? They never won back-to-back games in conference play. They never won back-to-back games in the calendar year of 2023. In my opinion, they're out. They came in on the bubble. They needed to avoid a bad loss and then pick up wins. They pick up a bad loss to Ohio State. Credit Ohio State, who actually beat Iowa in the second round on Wednesday. Also on the bubble, we mentioned this one the other day, Michigan and Rutgers in the 8-9 game. This felt like a loser leaves town game. This felt like if you don't win this game, you're not going to the NCAA tournament. Michigan loses this one to Rutgers. Michigan, with the loss, falls to 17-15 overall, 3-12 in those big quad one games. My hunch is Michigan is out. I don't know how you could justify putting a 17-15 team in that went 3-12 in quad one games. From the Rutgers perspective, they're now 19-13. They went 10-10 in the regular season. They were not good down the stretch, but they did get the big win on Thursday afternoon. They play Purdue on Friday, by the way, Purdue, the number one seed in the tournament. And all I would really say about that is obviously Rutgers, who beat Purdue early in the season, you get that win, you feel really good. If not, you're probably sweating on Selection Sunday. Rutgers, my guess would be in. Another team that would not be surprised if they were in that first four in Dayton. Let's keep it going in the Big Ten. So again, the quarters tomorrow will be Purdue versus Rutgers, and then Ohio State beat Wisconsin and Iowa. They will play Michigan State. On the bottom half of the bracket, how about this? Penn State upsets Illinois. Penn State, another team that entered on the bubble. They get the win. They actually looked really impressive. They are 20-12 overall. They got the victory on Thursday night. They have now won 6 of their last 7. And I'll tell you, final 10 games used to be an NCAA tournament resume thing. It no longer is, but Penn State's playing really well. I hope they get the opportunity. They beat Maryland on the final day of the regular season, won at Northwestern late in the year, beat Illinois in the regular season, and then beat them in the conference tournament. Penn State playing really well. They will play Northwestern, I believe, on Friday night. And then Indiana will take on Maryland, which took care of business against Minnesota. Maryland and Indiana are both in. Again, my pick to win this tournament was Michigan State over Indiana. So we'll see what happens there. But Michigan State, Indiana, Northwestern, and Purdue will all tip off their tournament on Friday. Let's keep it going. Let's go out to the Big 12, okay? So a couple interesting things on the Big 12. The first, a little bit of a real scary situation, honestly, is that Bill Self actually did not coach Kansas on Thursday. We get a report that he's in the hospital. There's a report on the internet that he had a heart attack. Now, Kansas has recently, late Thursday, released a statement saying there was no heart attack, but Bill Self is in the hospital because of an illness. He is not going to coach the entire Big 12 tournament. So this is one, I'm not going to sit here. I'm not going to pretend I have any inside information. Don't want the inside information. I just hope Bill Self is okay. I hope he's good to go. I hope he's ready for the NCAA tournament. And if he isn't, I just hope that he's okay health-wise. That's what's most important. Kansas takes care of business against West Virginia. And now Kansas, how about this? They play Iowa State, who for the second time in a week beat Baylor. Remember, Baylor played Iowa State on the final day of the regular season at home and got blasted. And then they lost again to Iowa State in the quarterfinal on Thursday afternoon. From the Baylor perspective, I'll just tell you this. I'm out on Baylor. When the bracket comes out, I don't care what the matchup is. They're a talented team. I think they can make it to a Sweet 16. They are not a team that can win a national championship, though. They're too inconsistent. Something's not quite right. Baylor has now lost 4 of its last 6. Again, got blasted on the final day of the regular season. You thought you would have gotten a best effort from them. Instead, they lose to Iowa State. The other half of the bracket, Texas takes care of Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State Oklahoma State's on the bubble. I don't know what else to say. They needed to beat Oklahoma in the play-in game on Wednesday. They did that. They really needed another win on Thursday to feel good. They lose to Texas. Don't know what to make of Oklahoma State. Again, feels like a team that with Wisconsin's loss and Michigan's loss and some of these other teams that we're going to get to in a minute, Oklahoma State feels like they're probably a play-in type team. I think a best case scenario for Oklahoma State is a play-in game. A worst case scenario is that they're out. I don't really see the scenario where they're like a 10 seed and don't have to worry on the day of when the bracket comes out. Oklahoma State right on the edge. I do think West Virginia, by the way, who beat Texas Tech in their opener, lost to Kansas in the quarters. West Virginia has probably done enough. And then the late game, TCU, who was my pick to win it, no big deal. They take care of business against Kansas State, 80-67. Both these teams are good. This is not TCU's the 6th seed. This is not an indictment on Kansas State that Kansas State stinks. No, Kansas State is really good. I think TCU is just really, really, really good when they're at full strength. They take care of business. Semifinal setup, TCU against Texas. Remember, TCU beat Texas in the final week of the regular season. Kansas against Iowa State. Iowa State actually beat Kansas the last time they played in Ames. Again, no Bill Self in that one. And I think TCU is the interesting one there. From the bubble perspective, West Virginia probably has done enough over the last 2 weeks to be in. Oklahoma State very much on the bubble. My guess is Big 12 gets 7 teams, maybe an 8th in Oklahoma. Let's keep it going. Let's keep the party going. Big East. Okay, so Big East, really interesting. So Marquette's the number 1 seed. Marquette takes care of business. Marquette beats St. John's in overtime. And again, that we very much talked about, because I think there's some big Rick energy coming to the Garden. I think Rick Pitino will be the St. John's head coach the next time that they walk out of the tunnel. They lose, maybe go to the NIT. But for the most part, Mike Anderson, I don't think really survives this week and this weekend. But Marquette wins. UConn wins a wild one. So I was doing radio during this game. I couldn't watch it closely, but UConn beats Providence. UConn was up 27 points at one point. Providence rallies, cuts it to about 3 or 4 with a minute or 2 to go. UConn holds on. UConn Marquette will be a great one on Friday night at the Garden. I think I said it on the last show. I don't miss very much about living on the East Coast. Being at Madison Square Garden during Champ Week for the Big East tournament is one. And then on the other side of the bracket from the Big East, not really much to add. Creighton, my pick to win this tournament, took care of Villanova pretty easily. Again, I told you Villanova was kind of an interesting team. Could they do enough? Could they make a run? They had just beaten Creighton, but Creighton gets their revenge. Villanova, first year of the post-Jay Wright era is over. Villanova finishes 17-16 overall. And I just think they're an interesting program to monitor, because a lot of those guys on that team were fifth-year guys that decided to come back for the program rather than go pro after last year. Cam Whitmore, their star freshman, is gone, and there's just not a lot of dudes coming back for that team. And you talk about a changing Big East, where Marquette has their coach with Shaka Smart, where Xavier has their coach with Sean Miller, where UConn is in good hands with Dan Hurley, and where St. John's and Georgetown could make an upgrade really quick. Is Villanova going in the wrong direction? Because this was supposed to be the bridge year where the veterans kind of kept them afloat, kept them good to go. Instead, they finished 17-16. Will be interesting to see what happens. Creighton plays Xavier in the championship game. Big news from Xavier we talked about, or in the semifinal, excuse me. Big news from Xavier. They lost one of their star players, Zach Fremantle, to a season-ending injury. He had been out, was officially ruled out for the season before this tournament. They beat DePaul. So we have the top 4 seeds actually in the Big East. UConn and Marquette on one side of the bracket. Marquette's the 1 seed, UConn's the 4. And of course, on the other side of the bracket, we have the 2-3 matchup, Xavier and Creighton. I expect to see a Creighton-UConn final, and I did pick Creighton before the tournament. SEC. So SEC like the Big Ten. SEC like the Big Ten. The top 4 teams have yet to take the court in Nashville. So Alabama, the 1 seed, the 4 seed Missouri. How about our guy, Dennis Gates? The 3 seed Kentucky, the 2 seed Texas A&M. They will all take the court on Friday. From the SEC perspective, most interesting game, Mississippi State does win in overtime. They take care of business against Florida. Think they're probably in the NCAA tournament. Obviously, if they were to beat Alabama, that would officially punch their ticket. Don't know if they will, but remember, they played Alabama tough at Coleman Coliseum about 3 or 4 weeks ago, but Mississippi State could not lose on Thursday. They get the win. Second game, Tennessee takes care of business against Ole Miss. Tennessee, Missouri, very interesting matchup. Tennessee, the last time these two teams played, Missouri won at the buzzer. But remember, that was when Tennessee had Zakai Ziegler. We'll see what Tennessee looks like without him. They get the win against Ole Miss. In the night bracket, Arkansas. Weird game from Arkansas. Okay, so it was one of I was watching it, and Arkansas was in complete control, so I turned it off. And then all of a sudden, it's a 2-point game, and Auburn's rallying, but Auburn holds on to beat Arkansas holds on to beat Auburn. For Arkansas, listen, 4 straight 20-win season for Eric Musselman. Still think just because of the bodies, they're still trying to figure things out. Still up, down, this, that, the other thing. But a 4 straight 20-win season, they're going to the NCAA tournament. And Auburn, with the win over Tennessee on Saturday to end the regular season a week ago, I think they get in even with the loss. Auburn at 20-12 overall, 10-8 in the SEC. Auburn loses. The late game, Vanderbilt quietly takes care of business against LSU. For LSU, year 1 under Matt McMahon comes to an end. Obviously, a little bit of a disappointment, but despite it, We'll see what happens with LSU, but Vanderbilt, I think, is the story. Vanderbilt's playing really well. They don't have their key player, Liam Robbins, but listen, they just won at Rupp Arena a few days ago. By the way, from the Kentucky perspective, it appears as though Cason Wallace will play on Friday. We'll see what happens there. But again, I picked Texas A&M to win this tournament largely because I don't know what's going on with Cason Wallace. If Cason Wallace plays, Kentucky is as live as anybody in these conference tournaments. Finally, Pac-12, UCLA, first game post Jalen Clark injury. Don't remember if we got to that on Wednesday's show, but Jalen Clark, star guard, out for the year, Achilles injury. It's just awful, awful, awful news. They survived Colorado, but they did not look good. And you talk about a situation where they could be in trouble. The Oregon team that they're playing has been up and down all year, but Oregon is not an easy team to beat. Oregon actually has a bunch of dudes. For Kentucky fans, you'll remember this name. Remember the name N'Faly Dante? A few years ago, the recruitment came down to Kentucky and Oregon. He chooses Oregon. Well, he's Oregon's best player, 13.5 points per game, 8.5 rebounds, almost 2 blocks per game. Oregon right now, they need to beat UCLA to get into the NCAA tournament. But they quietly won their final 3 games of the regular season. They beat Washington State in their opener. Would not shock me if they beat UCLA. Would not shock me if they play their way in to the NCAA tournament. Other side of the bracket, Arizona takes care of business. Wasn't pretty. Arizona did their Arizona thing up and down, but Arizona gets the win. Tommy Lloyd, by the way, 50 career wins. Most wins ever for a head coach through his first 2 years. So congrats to Arizona. They will play the winner of USC Arizona State. Not going to lie, I'm recording here at about midnight Eastern time. I will not be staying up for this entire game. If Arizona State wins, they are probably on the right side of the bubble. If Arizona State loses, they are probably on the wrong side of the bubble. So we'll see what happens there. A couple other notes before I get to my buddy John Jastremski. First of all, in the Pac-12, Cal has fired Mark Fox. Not surprised. Mark Fox was an abominable hire when it happened. It was an awful decision. I can get into the semantics of it. I don't know if you care, but I'll just tell you, he was a safe hire. They had, if you remember, Conzo Martin had been there. He left for Missouri. They elevated Conzo Martin's assistant, Y. King Jones. It did not work. So they wanted the safe former coach, bring him in. Well, Mark Fox finishes, how about this, 38-87 as the head coach of Cal, 17-61 in the Pac-12. Curious to see who they go after. 2 obvious names there. Joe Pasternak at UC Santa Barbara, Russ Turner at UC Irvine. 2 coaches, small schools in California. I think both would do very well there. And then finally, from the other conferences, Nevada, I think the big story outside of the Power 6, Nevada, Steve Alford, we may have talked about this. I can't remember, but Nevada was a wild story. They weren't projected to do very well this year. They overachieve all year. And then they basically go into the final week of the season. And essentially, let me just lay it out for you. All they really needed to do was basically win one of their final 3 games. So their final 3 games were against Wyoming, the worst team in the Mountain West, UNLV, who finished 7th in the Mountain West, or their conference tournament opener against San Jose State. They ended up losing all 3, and I think Nevada's officially on the wrong side of the bubble. Listen, Wolfpack fans don't like me because of all the stuff that happened a million years ago when Steve Alford was hired, but this is who he is. When you need a big win, can't count on him. Nevada needed one of their final 3 and could not get it. All right. I think that's it for Torres rambling on today's Aaron Torres pod. So I'm going to get out of here on this. I'm going to get out of here and welcome in my buddy, John Jastremski. So for people who don't know JJ was on the show a few weeks ago, really just a good dude. So JJ and I go way back. He used to be a radio host at WFAN, the big New York radio station. And he has since left to host a podcast for the Ringer Network called New York, New York. He now talks all things New York all the time. And he, he's also a Syracuse guy. So I bring him on. He and I talk a little bit about Boeheim, and then we switch gears to talk Pitino. And then we talk even a little bit of Aaron Rodgers. So JJ's coming up, John Jastremski from The Ringer. He was on about a month ago. I think you guys and girls will really enjoy it. Before I get out of here, I want to remind you, if you're not subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure that you are subscribed. Also, make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead, give us a quick 5 stars. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, all that good stuff. Make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. That is all for today's show. It is time for me to get over to John Jastremski. So before I go, quick reminder. One, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Make sure to download, bet $50 on any game this weekend. Get up to $1,000, $1,111 to be exact, in free bets. Also, make sure to sign up for the Aaron Torres Pod Bracket Challenge, courtesy of Bracket Fanatics. Time for me to go. Time for me to get to JJ, and that's all I have today. So, with that said, shout out to Torn Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Redick, you F-Ed. Can't believe all the stuff going on with JJ Redick this week. We're cool now. I respect what he did, but unblock me, bro. I'll be back on Monday. How about this? We're going to have a bracket on Monday. But for now, let's get to John Jastremski from The Ring. Joining me via Zoom, it's not often. We don't do very many guests these days on the Aaron Torres Pod. But about, 3 weeks ago, John Jastremski, The Ringer, New York, joined me. He's a Syracuse guy, now based out of New York, covers all things New York sports. But before he was New York, he was the Syracuse guy. So we talked a little Boeheim, a little St. John's, a little everything. He's back. You know who's not back for the first time in 48 years? Jim Boeheim. First of all, JJ, what's going on, man? You and I were texting all day Wednesday when this news broke. What's going on, man? How you doing?
It's a weird day, Aaron. First of all, thanks for having me, number one. Number two, the idea that Syracuse is going to have a new basketball coach. Gerald Ford was the president when Jim Boeheim started coaching. So, let's just think about that for a minute. Gerald freaking Ford was president of the United States when Jim Boeheim started his tenure at Syracuse. Look, you knew this day was coming. Clearly, the program has not been moving in the right direction over the last 2 years. It's been the worst 2-year stretch, arguably, in the tenure of Jim Boeheim. But it's a bittersweet day, Aaron. Listen, it's bittersweet because a lot of memories are rushing to you. Obviously, the moments of brilliance are rushing to you. And listen, I think I could say this without hesitation. I don't think we'll ever see a coach 47 years ever again. I mean, do you?
No, I was actually thinking about that. That was, it's one of those things. So I was a little bit torn. I talked about this before you came on. I did a little quick segment, and it's like I have been, I think, more critical than most people just because and we talked about this last time. I know what Syracuse can be. It could and should be in the top 15 every year. The Carrier Dome is a unique entity unto itself. The program has so much potential. It hasn't reached it. With that said, it was still very it was still sad on Wednesday when this news all came out. Let me start by asking you this. When we talked, it was, I think, a day or two after the comments about NIL and Wake Forest and Pitt. And I felt like that was kind of a public turning point for Boeheim, where he's been struggling, but whatever. And his kids had previously been on the team, but now they're not anymore. What has been the sentiment around Syracuse basketball? Because even that interview that I think was late January, it was the week of the Super Bowl. I remember you were getting ready to travel. That week, it felt like he said, it's my decision. I'll leave when I want. And it felt like the last 3-4 weeks, a tone had turned within the fan base or the administration or whomever. Is that fair to say? It just feels like a lot has changed since the last time we talked about 4 or 5 weeks ago.
I do think there's something to that, 100%. I thought that was a really bad look for Jim Boeheim. We talked about it at the time. He did not exactly receive a whole lot of love from people in the Syracuse media, the college basketball media. People went after him, and deservedly so. He walked back those comments. He apologized about a lot of the ridicule that he gave programs like Wake Forest and Pitt, and on we go. So I think there was that. And then the way Syracuse finished up the year, Aaron, they had to win against NC State. I'm like, okay, here we go again. Is Syracuse going to work their way onto the NCAA tournament bubble like they always do? Get in, get hot. You've seen them do it so many times. You've seen Boeheim when he's like kicked to the curb, strike back with a vengeance, but then they lose and get smoked by Duke. They get smoked by Clemson. They get smoked by Pittsburgh. Then they played their second to last home game against Georgia Tech. And no knock on Josh Pastner and his team. They played much better down the stretch. But they obliterated Syracuse. I mean, to the point where Syracuse lost by 30 points. They're getting booed. You had some fans wearing paper bags over their heads. Like, that's not Syracuse. So the Wake Forest game this weekend was very nostalgic because it was the 20th anniversary celebration for the 2003 team. They wore the throwback quarter zips. As you can tell, we got some honking going on. I don't know what the hell's going on out there. But anyway, quarter zips. You had Jerry's number get retired. You had Keem Warwick's number get retired. Mello's there. Like, the whole band is back together. And there was just a sense from people I talked to up there, this is it.
Wow.
Nobody said it. Nobody really knew officially. But the vibe was, this could be it for Jim Boeheim. So his presser on Wednesday was weird after the Wake Forest game. But Aaron, are you surprised? Like, it's Jim Boeheim. Jim Boeheim wasn't going to go up to the podium and say, hey, I'm retiring. Like, right after a game when they lose on a buzzer beater. Like, that's just not Jim Boeheim. So I'm not surprised, quite frankly, with this news. I know it's Boeheim, and we thought this day would never come, but the tea leaves were definitely there over the last month.
Are you surprised? So first of all, it is weird because I did like a quick immediate reaction video shortly after, and I was like, oh, Jim Boeheim retired. And then, I went back and reread the statement and obviously, rewatched his press conference, and it's very clear that he doesn't really want to leave. Are you surprised? I'll just ask you, are you surprised that the administration had the guts to look this man? I mean, he basically put them on blast. I don't know if put them on blast is the right word, but he kind of pushed his chips in the middle in that Wednesday press conference of, it's not my decision. Don't talk to me. And then an hour or two later, we get that statement. Are you surprised that the administration had the guts to essentially, I don't know if fire is the right word, but he basically got fired on Wednesday?
Well, it feels like he got pushed out to
Yes.
some degree. I mean, there's no getting around that. I'm not going to say the guy got fired because, it's not like, but it didn't end well. Like, it was not this graceful, elaborate, like, farewell tour that Krzyzewski got. But let's be honest, Aaron, he was never getting that. Like, there are certain like Boeheim is a storied figure in college basketball. I think we'll both agree on that. 47 years at Syracuse speaks for itself. But he's not like the warm and fuzzy. Not that Coach K is, but you know how it is with Coach K. There's this certain cachet. It's Duke, the Olympics, the whole deal. Boeheim played the villain role for a lot of years in college basketball. So it's not like every school is going to be giving Jim Boeheim bouquets as he's walking out the door.
That's a good point.
I am a little bit surprised, quite frankly. But you know what? I think the last 2 years, his age, which absolutely plays a factor. If Jim Boeheim was 10 years younger, I think you'd give him far more of the benefit of the doubt because you'd say, wow, look at the track record. Look at the program. Look at the history of it. When you're pushing 80 years old, Aaron, it's very much an ageism, what have you done for me lately type deal. It is. Jim's not going to have the same wiggle room at 78 that he had at 58 or 68. And when you're coming off the two worst years the program has had forever, that combined with the age, Jim, it's time.
Real quick, for the younger audience, the guys and girls that are in their late teens, early 20s, in college at Syracuse now, I think it's easy to forget. Like, it's easy to just watch the last 7, 8, 9 years, and there's been some tournament runs, but they've kind of been irrelevant, whatever.
The bubble team. They've been bubble Cuse. That's what they've been. They've been the team that overachieves in the tournament and is lucky to get in and makes the most of it. That, for anybody like beyond 2015, like if you're under the age of like 25, that's probably what you think about when it comes to Syracuse.
And I was going to ask you, for somebody that was there, I think you got there shortly after the championship run, and those teams were still very, very, very good. Tell us what he was like more towards his prime, because I think there is a generation of younger people that never saw him and they just see him as the old grumpy guy that never wins. Who cares? But obviously guys that are my age and your age, it's like, no, he was pretty good for literally like 35, 38, 40 of those 47 years.
100%. And I think with Boeheim, the first thing that comes to mind to me, Aaron, he's a basketball savant. He loves basketball. Like, he'll reference, even over the last couple of years, he'll reference a game from like the Mountain West at like 11:30 at 12 o'clock at night. It's like, hold on a second. You're coaching, you're in the Big East and the ACC, and you're watching Mountain West and you're watching NBA. Like, the guy absolutely loves basketball, loves it. So, like, that's something I'm always going to take away. And listen, I don't need to give your audience the history lesson on Jim Boeheim. He's one of the founding fathers of the Big East. Like, there's no getting around that. And yesterday, because I was in the nostalgic kind of mode, I'm not going to lie, Aaron, I went back and watched the 30 for 30 Big East documentary at like 1:30 in the morning. I said, you know what? I'm in a mood. I'm going to watch this. It's the building of the Carrier Dome, and it's Pearl, Washington, and it's Jim Boeheim going up against John Thompson, Syracuse, Georgetown. And for me, listen, it sounds crazy. My time at Syracuse, as big as the Georgetown rivalry was, Syracuse-UConn was the rivalry when I was there. I mean, I did the post-game show after the 6 overtime game. You had Calhoun with those great teams. You had Boeheim with those great teams. And the guy was a terrific, terrific tournament coach. Here's what I'll say about Boeheim. He always did better with the team that didn't have the highest of expectations. He would take a team that was a 4 seed. He would take a team that was a 10 seed and get the most out of them. That's where Boeheim was at his best. And he kind of had the reputation early in his career, Aaron, where he had the top teams, the Billy Owens, the Sherman Douglas teams that would lose early in the tournament. And that was always the knock on Jim. Oh, he can't win the big one. He can't win when it matters the most. And then later in his career, he didn't have the regular season success, but was having all this tournament success. Like, Jim Boeheim, I think his last, 10 tournament appearances, he lost in the first round once. Wow. 2019. It was like an automatic bet. He was getting it minimum to the round of 32 and more often than not, the round of 16. We'll never see anything like it, man. 45, 47 years at one school. Like, it's good. It's going to be an adjustment next year. And I wish Red Autry all the best. I hope he does a fabulous job. It's going to be weird not seeing the old man on the sidelines in Syracuse.
Well, as a UConn guy, I went through this about a decade ago with Calhoun. For people who don't know, tell us about the new head coach. And frankly, he's been around Boeheim, but what do you expect? Do you expect the 2-3 zone? Like, what do we know and what do we expect?
Okay, so I have no idea what kind of style they're going to play. I wanted to talk to a couple of Cuse guys yesterday. Lucky enough that I've, come across a bunch of players. Not trying to name drop here a little bit, but
Derek Coleman,
listen, he wasn't. Well, here's the thing. No. Younger guys, because I don't know Red Autry because he wasn't on the staff when I was at school. Sure. I was there 2006 to 2010. So you had Hopkins on the bench. You had Rob Murphy, who ended up coaching. He was on the bench. I think Jerry was there my last year or two. Red Autry came in 2011. So I don't know him personally at all. I talked to guys who did. They swear by him. They're telling me he's a great guy. He's a good recruiter. But my question for Red is, look, college basketball has changed dramatically. You're going to go recruit. I hope you're going to be able to recruit. That's a given. If you can't, you're not going to be a successful college basketball head coach. I think the 2-3 zone needs to be modified.
Agreed.
I'm not saying they can't play it at times, Aaron. I'm not saying that they can't play it half the time. But when you run into a shooter that's just shooting the lights out, the game has changed. The shooting percentages and the three-point shot that wasn't being hit the same way it's being hit now because you have this revolution of Steph Curry. Everybody wants to be Steph Curry now. That's the thing. Like, these kids growing up, they watch Steph. I want to be that guy. So they're just draining threes. The shooting in college basketball has gotten better. They're shooting more threes. That's where the zone has been put at a disadvantage. So I think you could play it from time to time, but to exclusively play the 2-3 zone in 2023 in college basketball. And I was always a pro zone guy, Aaron, because I'm like, they're college kids. They can't shoot.
Sure.
The math, the numbers, it works out. You have the personnel and the players to do it. Do it. Not anymore. My opinion has changed on that. So I'd like to see Syracuse modified to some degree.
Well, and I think, too, the other thing, and I've said this with Boeheim for years, dude, the best players want to get to the NBA as fast as possible, and you're just not going to do that. It's a harder sell playing the zone, like, oh, I'm going to get you ready for the NBA in 1 year or 2 years or whatever. those are the guys that ultimately win. Last Syracuse question, two other quick questions, we'll get you out of here. But from the Syracuse perspective, is there any reason in your mind that they can't re-elevate for the crowd that is 25 plus that does remember number 1 seeds, top 10 finishes, top 15 finishes, McDonald's All-Americans? Is there any reason they can't? Because I remember one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on this show is because I scream into this microphone all the time is like, I have been to big games at the Dome. That place is so unique. It's so different. And this program should always be in the top 10, top 15 every single year, competing at the highest level. They have advantages that no one else has, even though obviously there's some disadvantages with the geography and everything. Point being, is there any reason that whether it's this coach, whether like over the next 10 years, is there any reason that they can't get back to that level where they're competing at the top of the conference? I know that since they got to the ACC, it hasn't had the same level of success, but any reason that they can't? Because to me, I still think this is a program that has all the tools and necessities to compete at the highest level of the sport.
Yeah, listen, I'm not even going to say top 10. Can they get back to, Aaron, consistently being a top 30 team?
Sure.
You know, where every now, you know, I'm not saying you're not, let's put it this way. You're not Duke, where every year you're of the expectation you're going to be in the top 10. Like, I don't think the standard is that high in Syracuse, but throw me a top 10, top 15 every 3 to 5 years and, you know, make sure you're perennially in the mix. Does that make sense?
Of course.
That to me is, listen, every now and again, you're going to have a down year. North Carolina has down years. UConn, UCLA, like every now and again, you're going to have that anomaly of a year. It just can't be extended stretches. Can Syracuse do it? Yeah, listen, it's about NIL. It's about transfer portal. It's about recruiting. If they can harness and develop and grow those entities in 3 to 4 years, I want to see Adrian Autry have a top 25 team. And if not, then he's not the right coach for. I'm not saying it's got to happen overnight, Aaron. Within 3 to 4 years, can you get me a top 25 team? Is that too much to ask? I don't think so.
In this ACC, no, it shouldn't be. And
that's what I'm saying. If you do it right and you make it, that's the thing with college basketball now. Like you say, oh, it's tough to, you could turn it around pretty quickly if you attack the transfer portal. And, you know, it's not as much necessarily about, hey, I got to have all my freshmen grow, develop, and be there for 3 to 4 years. You don't know if they're going to be there for 3 or 4 years anymore, man. They could say after 1 year, screw this, I'm going somewhere else. So you got to have that right mix. That's what the right teams have a good mix of guys who stay, and they complement with the transfer portal. No question.
One quick thought on that. Louisville fans have been in my mentions, but they're right, is that Kenny Payne this year, like you should never be 4-28 at Louisville in the transfer portal.
Yeah, I don't know how that happens. And
so you look at Kansas State, Missouri, both teams that are very comfortably in the NCAA tournament with first-year coaches. It can happen with the right coach with the transfer portal 2023. All right, 2 quick ones. We'll get you out of here. One, last time I talked to you, I was peer pressuring you into helping me make Rick Pitino to St. John's happen. We're recording here before St. John's plays Marquette. So I don't know if Marquette's going to win, if St. John's is going to survive to the what it would be semifinals, whatever. What is your sense of where St. John's is right now? Is Mike Anderson? I'm starting to get some intel that Mike Anderson probably will be out after the Big East tournament. And I don't know. I don't want to say it, but I'm getting
Pitino's
some big Rick energy.
Again. No, I'll say it. And we have a little bit of a different tune from the last conversation we had. Somebody pretty close told me it's possible.
Yes.
That's all I'm going to say, Aaron. It's possible. And if you're St. John's, do it. Whatever it takes. You haven't won a tournament game in 20-something years.
Unbelievable.
Pitino, you want to get buzz around a program that has been as irrelevant as it gets in New York. Rick Pitino gives you immediate buzz, immediate credibility. Do it. Do it.
And he's there. He's in the city. And, you know, I don't know how closely you follow the day-to-day of college hoops. He did an interview about 3 weeks ago with Matt Norlander where he said, there's only like 12 states I want to live in. Like,
well, I was going to say, if they don't hire him, Georgetown might hire him. So you want Pitino in your backyard recruiting against you.
And he's in the city right now.
Aaron, he will take that Georgetown job, I think, in 5 minutes if St. John's don't offer him the job. He probably would prefer St. John's because he doesn't have to move. He doesn't have to relocate. He just has to go to a different work environment. If it's Georgetown, though, that's bad news for St. John's. Because you know this and I know this. They may hire a good coach. Maybe they get Keith Urgo from Fordham, who's doing a fabulous job. Maybe they do something else. I don't know. they're not getting Rick Pitino. You know it, and I know it. They're not getting Rick Pitino.
Well, that's what I mean, is that he's a Hall of Famer in your city right now. It's not like, oh, he's whatever. He's he's in your city. He wants to be there. And I am hearing very similar buzz that it may happen. Last quick question. Again, we're recording, what is it today? Thursday the 9th, early. Aaron Rodgers, is he going to be a Jet? I just need the intel. What's going on?
Sure. Listen, I don't know. I don't think the Jets know. I think only Aaron Rodgers knows. So if you could find your way into one of those darkness retreats, or you can find your way onto the Aaron Rodgers compound, you might have a better answer than I do. But yeah, I think so, Aaron. I think he's going to be a Jet because I don't think he's going back to Green Bay. Kind of get the sense they've reached a point of no return. And I think it's time. The Jets need a star quarterback. You take a shot for a year or two. There's no better option. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to be a Jet.
Do you buy into, like, how do you think he and the New York media will get along? I'll just say this is we had on one of my radio shows, we had Plaxico Burress on, who does some stuff for Fox Sports Radio. And I asked him, and I know, but I asked him anyway, I was like, how would he do with the New York media? And all Plax said was like, the New York media is everything everybody says it is and more, and he better be ready for it. How do you anticipate that relationship going if it does happen?
It'll be frosty.
Yeah.
It'll be frosty. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but it doesn't mean that Aaron Rodgers as a player can't have success. Here's the one thing I'll say about New York. He's not going to live in the city, Aaron Rodgers. I'd be stunned. He's probably going to be in some secluded mansion, very close to Florham Park, go to work, come back, go to work. And the one thing I'll say about Aaron Rodgers from a media perspective, he has become such like a national star that national media has started to descend upon the Packers way too often. You know what I mean? Like, and I know we live in this world where you can kind of hide and do Zooms and you don't have to have media in your face day in and day out. You can, he's used to that. Like,
I was going to say,
he's getting plenty of attention. It's not like he is some small town star that nobody knows who he is. Like, Aaron Rodgers had cameras in his face now for a while. Listen, I think it's more about his age more than anything else. Like, we're not talking about a quarterback who's 25 anymore. Aaron Rodgers is getting up there. So you add all of that up, that to me is the question. Can he play at a high level for the next 2 years? The Jets, they have no choice. Derek Carr was not it. Jimmy Garoppolo is fine. He's not Aaron Rodgers. You want to be super relevant and have at least a hope to get to a Super Bowl next year, Rodgers gives you the best chance to do so, without question.
John Jastremski, New York podcast. I know you got to run. College Hoops is starting here as we record. Dude, man, thank you. And, you know, hey, today, first day of the rest of your life, first day of the rest of life of Syracuse
Yeah, it's
fans,
going to be
man.
weird. By the way, good start here from Michigan. Rutgers stinks. They can't score at all. So hopefully it's going to be a nice, easy cover for me. We'll see.
All right, brother, man. We'll do it again soon. Enjoy, and we'll speak soon.